Chapter 17 Survivor. Kai opened her eyes and blinked several times. At first, she didn't feel anything. It was as though she didn't have a body until she began to feel the numbness and the stiffness in her muscles and bones. She coughed a little as she looked around, but she couldn't see anything. She tried to move, but all she heard was the jingling of chains whenever she did. She felt her hands and felt a broad and rusty metal bracelet around her wrist. She moved her hands while tapping everything she could and realized that she was, in fact, chained. "Help!" Kai tried to yell, but her throat was dry and her voice only came out as a hoarse whisper. "Help!" She tried again, this time a bit louder, like a bird of the night. Kai swallowed and tried to gather as much saliva as she could to moisten her throat and mouth. "Help!" she screamed again, this time like a lion who had had enough of the drama, and that's when all of a sudden, her cage was lit up by white bright lights. Kai squinted her eyes as she tried to look around, but her eyes took a bit of time to adjust to the brightness. "Look who's awake," Kai recalled the voice. "How are you feeling now?" It was none other than Tom, the one she always despised. Kai glared at Tom. "Surprised to see me, I see," Tom chuckled, but Kai kept silent. "I want to thank you for bringing Dom to us. I never knew that he cared about you so much." "Go to hell," Kai blurted angrily. "Oh, I'm not sure if I want to go to hell so soon. Anyway, I believe you have most of the information on Psycho Wolf in here." Tom tapped on her head. "So I'm going to find a way to get all the remaining information out." "I'm not telling you shit." "Oh, you will." He chuckled softly and snapped his fingers. A few seconds later, a man wearing a stained apron appeared out of the darkness while pushing a metal trolley that had several torture tools on it, such as knives, pliers, nails, hammer, and other tiny tools that Kai couldn't see. Kai gulped at his sight and held onto the chair arms tightly. "I'll leave you some time with my friend," Tom said as he exited the room. Dom and Aaron were thrown into a dark room just like Kai, but neither of them were tied up. Dom came too. The first thing that made him realize that he wasn't dead was the pain in the back of his head. He grunted as he pulled himself off the cold ground and tried to look around. His eyes took a bit of time adjusting to the dark, but a few minutes later, he could make out Aaron's body on the side. "Aaron! Aaron!" he called out softly. Aaron didn't wake up though. Dom breathed heavily and touched the back of his head. He felt a large bump which ached when he touched it. Dom looked around the room and saw 4 walls. They were in a room, but there was no light and no windows. He wasn't sure what kind of room he was in. "Hello? Is anybody there?" As soon as Dom yelled, the lights in the room came on. "Where am I?" he said as he caught the blurry vision of Mondai and Tom entering the room. "I'm afraid, Dom, you're in a bad place." She paused. "You're in an underground bunker, surrounded by my soldiers. You're not going anywhere, and I have an old friend who wants to say hello." A sturdy man slowly walked in through the door. "Who is that?" Dom thought to himself. "Eli?" Dom whispered. "Eli?" This time louder. Dom could barely say the words. "How can that be?" he said, as if talking out loud to himself. "Thought I was dead, Dom?" Dom's eyes opened up wide as his face turned white, as like a person would who was looking upon a ghost. "Eli has been working with me, Dom, and he's not too happy that you left him to die in the rebels' fortress." Eli walked towards Dom, while Tom was standing there smirking. Eli turned his attention to Tom. Tom was still smirking, looking at Dom in his place of suffering. Eli stared at Tom still, until Tom finally noticed him and his expression changed from confused to frightened. Tom tried to reach for his gun, but Eli grabbed his hand and twisted it backwards while crushing it. The gun went off, and Tom was shot dead. He grabbed the gun while Tom fell to the floor. He pointed it directly at Mondai and said, "Sit down." "What are you doing, Eli?" Mondai asked while slowly sitting down. "Put these on." He threw some industrial strength zip ties at her. "Feet first, then hands," as he watched like a hawk. "This is the day that I've been waiting a long, long time for, to have you both in the same room," he snapped. "Eli, don't! You don't want to do this. Dom is the one who left you there to die. He could have saved you, but he didn't." Eli turned his attention to Dom. "Why did you leave me there?" "Eli, it was bad. Reinforcement rebels had returned back to the base when they got word we had entered. I couldn't get over to your position without getting straight into their line of fire. And you," he stuttered, you killed those people, the maids, the servants. You didn't need to do that." Eli replied, "That's war, Dom. Bad stuff happens. But reinforcements getting back in the base, That's impossible. They couldn't get more troops in. Mondai had guards on the entrance gate, and Richard hacked the electricity to shut it down. Why don't you tell him, Mondai? Dom exclaimed. Tell him what? This is ridiculous. Eli, you need to let me go. Tell me, Mondai, now, Eli said as he pointed the gun with a look of deadly intentions at her. Okay, I left the gate open. Richard had disabled it anyways. I'm sure it wasn't going to open. I went and collected their treasures. It wasn't that hard to do as the rebels had left their safekeeping posts. How could you do that? Look what happened to me. Eli motioned in disgust at Mondai's admission and raised his shirt to show the bullet scars he absorbed before escaping. Like you said, Eli, it was war. It was better I had those valuables than the rebels who used it to fund their terror. They stole it anyway. Come on, let me go now. I'm not going to touch you, Dom. But Mondai, we're going for a boat ride. And with that, he scooped her up and flung her over his shoulder. We can share it, she protested and begged. Oh, we will. Just one more thing I'll be needing, Eli said, as he walked into the other room where Kai was being held. While still holding Mondai gagged and bound, he kicked open the door to the torture room. He shot the man in the apron who was sharpening his tools, folded up the torture kit, and slung it under his arm and walked off. He disappeared off into a secret tunnel. Dom and Aaron raced inside the room to comfort Kai. As they started looking around, there was an explosion on the underground entrance door. Smoke cleared and it was the old General Kaufman and Richard Thompson entering. Dom, you in here? The sound of a friendly voice was comforting to Dom. Dom updated them on the happenings as they made their way back, past the bodies of Mondai's soldiers who the old General and Thompson had taken down on their rescue. Kaufman, Richard Thompson, Aaron, and Kai, who had her arm around Dom, looked over and saw Eli packing Mondai onto a boat in the distance. Voices echoed back. You can't do this to me! The owls will get you! Mondai hollered. Wolves eat owls, Eli responded as he undocked the boat. No one said anything. She'll have the trip of a lifetime, Dom broke the silence, as Kai chuckled. Then Kaufman said, I guess wolves always find a way. I've built my wolf pack, Dom said as he glanced at his friends. When he returned home and things settled down, Dom made a blog post, and in it he said, in the unfolding of people's stories, one can discover that there are certain principles which establish outcome likelihoods. One can learn how to stay afloat regardless of the depth of the water. Fundamentally, one must be measured. Surprises become less of a surprise because you have calculated and catered for the situations that may present. Coinciding with this measurement is having a strong support network that equally watches ahead as they do over each other, each function operating in their gifts and strengths, supplying one another and being supplied to. Upon this foundation, build with flexibility and adapt to life's ever-changing circumstances. As we build, give observance toward the end of the story above. Decisions are made with one's best judgment at the time, yet mistakes are made with consequences to be owned. Mistakes which, though devastating at the time, may be managed through adaptability springing from the firm foundations as noted. Measure, build, and adapt. Each bump along the road is just a comma, never a full stop. Period.